Grab hold of your Bibles and say this with me. Say, this is my Bible. I have what it says I have. I can do what it says I can do. I declare this morning, my mind is alert. My heart is receptive. I'll be taught the Word of God. And I'll never be the same again. Open up your Bibles, if you would, to Nehemiah chapter 6. Now, Nehemiah was a guy in the Old Testament. He was a guy in the Old Testament, and actually his people, he was a Jew, he was a Hebrew, they had been captured, and so their land was occupied by a foreign force. They were in subjection to that, and he had been taken away, his family had been taken away from the land, and he was called the king's cupbearer. And what that meant was that he would always taste the king's food first, drink the king's drink first, and all that kind of thing to make sure nobody's trying to poison the king. And one day he was in front of, he'd have people that would come from his homeland and say, how is it back home? What's going on? And they would share with him, that, man, it's not good. The wall is broken down. There are all these challenges, all these struggles. And it would just grip his heart. He would be so overwhelmed, just so overcome by it. And finally one day he's in front of the king, and the king is like, dude, what is wrong with you? Are you sick or something? And he's like, man, king, forgive me, but I hear of these things in my home, and it just grabs my heart. And I want to do something about it. Everybody say, do something. If we're going to bring about change, we have to be willing to do something. So I want to do something about it. And the king said, well, how long will it take? And he said, I'll be gone this long. The king goes, you go. So he went, and God used him. And so in Nehemiah chapter 6, if you're like, where is that? Well, the Bible's divided like Old Testament and New Testament. Nehemiah's in the Old Testament. It's a few books before Psalms, like there's Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, and Psalms. And so if you get to Psalms, you've gone too far. But Nehemiah chapter 6, now, we're going to read a lot of verses today, but we're in church, so I figured that'd be okay. So anyway, Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1 says this, Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet set up the doors and the gates. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. So they built this wall. There was just a little left, and these guys wanted to meet with them because he said, but I realized they were plotting to harm me. So I replied by sending this message to them. I am engaged in a great work. Everybody say that. Say, I am engaged in a great work. Say that again. Say, I am engaged in a great work. Say this. Say, we are engaged in a great work. Now let's say Cedar Point is engaged in a great work. So I'm just telling you, man, I've had to use this verse over and over again. Nehemiah's like, I'm not going to meet with you guys. I'm engaged in a great work. And so he went on to say, I'm engaged in a great work. And he said, why should I stop working to come and meet with you? 4 times they sent the same message, and each time I gave the same reply. The 5th time, Sanballat's servant came with an open letter in his hand, and this is what it said. There is a rumor among the surrounding nations, and Geshem tells me it's true, that you and the Jews are planning to rebel, and that is why you're building the wall. According to his reports, you plan to be their king. He also reports that you have appointed prophets in Jerusalem to proclaim about you. Look, there is a king in Judah. You can be very sure that this report will get back to the king, so I suggest that you come and talk it over with me. I replied, there is no truth in any part of your story. You are making up the whole thing. They were just trying to intimidate us, imagining that they could discourage us and stop the work. Anybody ever tried to intimidate you before? Anybody ever tried to discourage you before? Look at what his response was. So I continued. Everybody say continued. The work with even greater determination. With even greater determination. So they were trying to intimidate him. He said, look, I'm going to do this. I'm even going to have greater determination to do the work that God has called me to do. Vision is so important, man. It was the thing that caused Nehemiah to risk his position, to risk his title, to risk what he is. And it applies to individuals, it applies to organizations, it applies to churches. And so right here we see Nehemiah that he's went back to this place, and there are some people that are not happy about what's taken place. And so they're challenging him, trying to get him to come off the wall. And he said, look, I'm engaged in a great work. I've had to tell myself that over and over again throughout the years. I'm engaged in a great work. And so many times, one of the great tools of the enemy is that he wants to distract us. He wants to distract us from God's plan and God's purpose for our life. Whatever it is that God wants to do in that moment, He'll use all sorts of things. all sorts of circumstances, all sorts of situations to distract us from what God has called us to do in this moment, at this time, in this hour. And we have to remind ourselves we are engaged in a great work. We are engaged in a great work. I think about back when, most of you know our story that I'm from here. I'm from northeastern Oklahoma. I'm from the Claremore area. I mean, I'm an Okie. We're peeps. I mean, it's just one of those things. And I don't mean the little, marshmallow things. But anyway, we lived in New Mexico for 17 years. And we were there, and we first went there in Clovis, New Mexico. And it was a great church, Faith Christian Family Church. David Swan, still my friend and my pastor. And the church was kind of small, and over time, God blessed it, and it grew. And we reached a point one day where we're going into a building program, and Pastor Swan was like, "Man, I just feel like God's dealing with me to build the youth facility first." And so I was a youth minister, so I was like, "You just follow God, Pastor." And so he built this facility, and we're just so excited about it. And man, I thought everybody else would be excited too. I thought the community would be like, "You guys go for it," and they were excited, but it wasn't a good excited. And so I remember, man, I'd get phone calls. People would write letters. And usually when folks write letters, the one thing they leave off is their signature. Cowards. And so what would happen is that they would leave that off. You couldn't respond or anything. And so it was just one of these things that just coming at me and just getting phone calls and all that kind of stuff. I just felt so discouraged. And I look back on that and I have to realize now that those people in their brokenness were not my issue. Some of them thought they were doing the right thing. But they didn't realize that they were being used by the enemy to distract me from what God had called me to do, to distract us from what God had called us to do. And we have to understand that one of the things that vision does is it keeps us from getting distracted. If you're taking notes, vision keeps us from getting distracted. Let me just tell you that, and we're talking about church, but this can apply to your own life personally too. That whatever your vision in life is, that the enemy, he has some common tactics, some common tools that he will use to distract you from God's plan and purpose for your life. One of them I put down here is that he uses his discouragement. Have you ever been discouraged before? Like only 8 of you? Man, let me hang out with the rest of you because I've been discouraged before. And so many times, that he'll try to send discouragement and try to tell you you're not going to make it, you're going to fail, this is never going to happen. And we have to remind ourselves, I'm engaged in a great work. As a matter of fact, with these guys, Nehemiah said, I knew they were just trying to discourage me. So he said, I love this. He goes, so I continued to work with even greater determination. That he looked at discouragement, and instead of letting it stop him, it was one of those things that reminded him of what his purpose was. Another tactic that the enemy uses is fear or intimidation. Well, you're just going to fail. You're never going to make it. Who's going to listen to you? Who do you think you are? You're too young, you're too old, you're too this, you're not smart enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not talented enough, you're not gifted enough. You're going to fail. All of those things, and we have to remind ourselves, I'm engaged in a great work. We are engaged in a great work. We're engaged in a work that God has called us to do. Another thing that he'll use is offense. He'll try to get us offended. And man, with social media, it's so easy to be offended. I've fallen into that trap before. Somebody posts something, I'm like, oh yeah, well, and I hit sin. And as soon as I hit sin on the inside of me, I feel this, gotcha. Because now not only are me and you fighting, but me and all your relatives and all your friends, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's an onslaught. We are engaged in a great work. Why should we come off the wall and embrace offense? It distracts us. It distracts us from what God has called us to do and who he's called us to be. Another thing is accusation. Right here, they were accusing Nehemiah that, oh, your motives are all wrong. Your motives are all wrong. You just want to be king. I'm engaged in a great work. I'm not going to deal with the devil making accusations through you. I'm engaged in a great work. I look at David when he showed up to fight Goliath one day, and his own brothers, his own family said to him, we know why you're here. You just want to see the war. And so the enemy will always make accusations and you're not good enough. You're not, all of those things that come along. And yet we have to understand that vision keeps us focused. I'm not going to get distracted by your accusation. I'm not going to get distracted by your intimidation. I'm not going to get distracted by this fear of failure. I'm engaged in a great work. I've had to say it over and over and over. It's great, not because it's mine, but because it's God's. It's great, not because it's ours, because it's his. We are engaged in a great work. We're engaged in a great work to be a story-changing place for every soul that walks through our doors is a great work. To be a place that wants to be good to people and is not looking to take stuff out of the community but put stuff into the community. That is a great work. To journey with people and to love whoever's in front of us is a great work. We're engaged in a great work. And it's not ours, it's His. But so many times the enemy wants to distract us and get us off balance and get us to look away, because once we're looking away, we're not engaged in His great work any longer. I don't want to be distracted, do you? I don't want to be distracted as a church, but I want to challenge us in our personal lives as we kick off 2019 to not be distracted in what God has spoken to you personally about your life, about your world, about your relationships and the things that He has for you. That if He's directed you that direction, if He's directed you, you are engaged in a great work. Don't get off the wall and enter into conflict and be intimidated and quit and give up just because you feel like a failure sometimes. We all deal with that, don't we? I know I do. And then I have to remind myself, I'm engaged in a great work. You know what? I can keep going because it's not mine. I didn't pick me, He did. You didn't pick you, He did. You're engaged in a great work. And so vision keeps us from being distracted. That's why we don't do everything. Sometimes people come and maybe they have another church background and say, we should do this. And I have to sometimes be like, that's a great idea, but it's not connected to the work He's given us to do. So as good as an idea it is, I'm even going to let your good work distract us from God's work. We're engaged in a great work. And so we're called, vision keeps us from being distracted from doing that. So vision is so powerful, number one, because it keeps us from getting distracted. Look at number two, if you would. You're in Nehemiah 6. Go to Nehemiah 2. That's four chapters before that. Now, in Nehemiah 2, this is after Nehemiah has met with the king. He's went back to his home area. He's walked around and looked at the place. Nobody knew about it. And now he's getting ready to sit down and talk with the leadership about what's going on. So Nehemiah 2, verse 16. It says, the city officials did not know I had been out there or what I was doing. For I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. But now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Nehemiah had heard about all the things that were going on. He'd heard about the stuff and the situations that were happening there. And then he hears about it, and then he shows up and he sees it. And the problem is that when he sees it, his heart is broken. The challenge with them is that they had gotten so used to living with that it became their normal. It became their, this is okay. And one of the challenges that we all face is that there's things that take place in our life that we've let it go on so long that it's just become our normal. And one of the things that allows it to be our normal is that we've never attached vision to it. And so right here, he challenges them. He says, these walls that have been broken down that you've lived with for years, this disgrace has fallen on our people that you've lived with for years, it can change. And it can change if we determine to do something about it. And these people that had lived like this, with this for years, were suddenly inspired to commit. Not because the problems were just created, but there'd been vision given to the problem, and they stood up and they said, we can do this. As a matter of fact, I love the response here. It says, they replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. Everybody say good work. So vision did this. It brought about commitment in their life. Here's this. Vision gives us a reason to commit. So many times in churches, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this, that so many times, we say, hey, look, we really want you to be involved. And some people will sign up because they'll have a little guilt, maybe even a little conviction, and I guess I should work or whatever. But the reason why it doesn't last so many times is because we've never attached vision to it. Have you ever asked yourself, why is ushering so important? Why does it matter? Have you ever asked yourself, why is ministering to people's babies so important? When we say that we want people to show up and experience the love of God, what does that mean? Is that some kind of just intangible thing that's just kind of in the atmosphere? Or is that me serving another human being through the love of God? Is that how people experience the love of God? Is it something that's felt or something that is experienced and seen? Vision reminds us of that. Vision is so powerful that it causes me to commit. It causes me to say no to something that I've been saying yes to for the longest time, and it causes me to say yes to something that I've been saying no to. It takes me from the uncomfortable to from the comfortable to the uncomfortable. Vision is so powerful. Right here, these guys who had lived this way for years, it had become their normal. And as Nehemiah said, this is a disgrace and we've allowed it to happen. And they stood up and they said, we can change this. We'll commit to it. And it says they began the work. It was a good work. It's so powerful what takes place in our lives. And so when we talk about, this being a story-changing place, that one of the reasons that so matters is because it's connected to keeping us from getting distracted. But it also helps me understand that's why it matters what I do here. That's why it matters, what my role is here, that I serve here in this way or I serve in this purpose, because it gives me a reason to commit. I put these things down. Without vision, negative circumstances become our normal and then we get used to it. Without vision, negative circumstances become our normal. We struggle with habits and addictions, not because we're bad people, but because without vision, we're incapable of overcoming it by ourselves. If you attach a vision to your sobriety and your liberty, it moves you. It moves you to change. If you attach vision to your commitment and consecration to the work of God in the local congregation, it's no longer you just doing your duty, fulfilling your responsibility. It is you committing to the work of God so that people's stories can be changed when they walk through the doors because you're engaged in a great work. You're part of a great work. And no matter what other things happen that try to distract you along the way, that you say no to those things. You say no to offense. You say no to fear. You say no to intimidation. You say no to accusation. And you engage in that great work because you're reminded of God's plan. Vision is so powerful. It gives us the ability to say no to the things that are in front of us that aren't ours anyway. I love Joseph whenever, he went to Potiphar's house and when he was a boy, he had a vision, and in that vision, God told him that he was going to do certain things. And so he was so excited about it that he went and told his older brothers, God spoke to me last night. He gave me a dream. Oh yeah, what was it? He said, you guys are going to be working for me someday. Older brothers don't like that because most older brothers think younger brothers think they're the boss anyway, don't they? And most older brothers and sisters think that little sisters think they're the boss. But he said, you're going to be working for me someday. And so they were so mad, they sold him into slavery. He was presented with Potiphar's wife. She stood in front of him and tried to seduce him. And he said, no. Why is that? Because he had a yes that was burning in him that was bigger than what stood in front of him. He was thrown in prison and could have get bitter, but he didn't get bitter. Why? Because the yes on the inside of him was bigger than the hardship he was dealing with right now. Vision brings lasting commitment. And your normal, even though it's your normal, it may not be God's plan for you. And the only reason why it stays is because you have no vision to get out of it. Vision has the power to change your normal. Vision has the power to change our normal. What churches always do, what this church has always done, vision has the power to change that, to make history, to have an effect on the community that goes beyond these doors, that affects the way that we live, it affects the way we treat each other, it affects the things that we do, it affects the message that we carry, and it's not our own. It's the message that God so loved the world that He gave Jesus, so that whoever believes in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. When we embrace that as part of God's vision that He's implanted in our lives, commitment becomes second nature. It becomes an automatic. Not only does it affect our church, but let me ask you this about your life. What's been normal in your life for far too long? Maybe this morning God wants to give you vision, not just about what we do here, that we are engaged in a great work, But maybe there's areas in your own life outside of here that He wants to give you vision about those things that will empower you and enable you not to be held captive by that any longer. You keep doing those things not because you're horrible or anything like that. You keep doing them because right now they feel bigger than you and bigger than you have. And what if God breathed a vision in your life that enabled you? The yes in you because of that was so huge that saying no was nothing. We're engaged in a great work. And so the reason why it's so important that we know where we're headed as a church, the reason why we know where we're going in the direction of a church, is because it calls on all of us. It allows all of us that maybe have never been really committed to anything in God's plan or God's work or in a local church, that because now we're like, I want to be part of people's stories being changed. That we rise up and we say, count me in. Count me in. It's wild that a guy shows up and all of this time, you know, the people have just lived with this, walked by it, and in one night Nehemiah looks at it, and I love this, he said, you know very well what trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. We get so engaged politically in our culture. We fight with each other over politics. We're passionate. We think our issues are political, and they're not. We get so engaged with so many things, and we create conflict with so many things. And all of these things are symptoms of this one thing, and that is humanity's need for Jesus. And when our hearts get fixed, the symptoms change. This is not a political struggle. It's not a social struggle. It's not an educational struggle. It's a spiritual struggle. And because of our lack of involvement and because we've been distracted into all these other things, we've lost sight of that. And we've allowed some disgrace to come. And that can change. We can rebuild. But we rebuild by dealing with the issues, God's plan and God's vision of impacting people's lives by telling them about Jesus and who He is. I'm engaged in a great work. You're engaged in a great work. I'm not going to get off the wall. We're not going to get off the wall because we're intimidated to do so. We won't get off the wall because, you know, we're accused that our motives are all wrong. We're not going to get off the wall to engage in offense. We're engaged in a great work. And anytime I'm tempted to just become indifferent, I'm reminded of the vision that God has given me, and it stirs up something in me and says, I'm not quitting. I'm not quitting. I'm going to keep going because of this vision that's connected to people's lives and because of what Jesus has done to me as a result of it. Vision has the power to change our normal. Let's look at number 3 and we'll close with this. Go with me if you would to Acts 16. It's in the New Testament. It's the 5th book of the New Testament. Acts 16. So there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. Now, Paul was a guy that had gotten saved. He'd given his life to Jesus. And the calling on his life was unusual for them at that time because up until that time, most of the people that had become Christians felt like that God was taking this message to the Jews alone. And God was revealing to him and to Peter that, hey man, I'm going to reach to the Gentiles also. He said, what's a Gentile? Anybody that's not a Jew. And so he wasn't just reaching the Jews, he's reaching them, but also reaching the Gentiles. And so in verse 9, well, actually, so they were praying about where they're supposed to go next. And so they thought about this one place, and they just felt on the inside of them that God was saying, no, don't go there. And then they thought about another place, and God said, no, don't go there. And so they went to bed that night. In verse 9, it says this, that night Paul had a vision. A man from Macedonia and northern Greece was standing there, pleading with him, come over to Macedonia and help us. So we decided to leave for Macedonia at once, having concluded that God was calling us to preach the good news there. Now, I love this because Paul had this vision, but as he shared it with them, that as they're listening, they're like, man, God hasn't just called you to do this. He's called us to do this, to make an impact. So they go and it says that they went to that place and they began to tell people about Jesus. Well, one day there was a young girl that was walking around and she kept yelling out to them, these are men of the Most High God, listen to what they have to say. And you're like, well, that sounds like a pretty good thing. Well, the problem is that she was actually possessed by an evil spirit. And so this evil spirit was kind of crying that out, probably creating a disruption to disqualify them. And her job during the day was she was a fortune reader. And there were people that she worked for that were making lots of money because people would show up just like they do today and give them their money so their fortune could be told. Let me just say this as a side thought. Don't do that. You have the Holy Spirit on the inside of you. All right? You don't need to go any fortune teller or soothsayer or whatever other name an entertainer wants to give themselves. You have God on the inside of you. All right? You don't need that. Matter of fact, it's an abomination. I knew that'd make you happy. So anyway, here's the thing. So she's doing that, and they told the evil spirit to come out of her. Well, these guys could no longer make money from her because this spirit was not giving, this evil spirit was not, telling them things through her. She got saved, and they were so mad that they took Paul and Silas before the leadership in the town and began, to accuse them of things. And they were whipped and beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. Now, I can only imagine, if you've ever been in jail, I can only imagine how hopeless it feels in there. I can only imagine how dark it feels in there. And imagine you've just been whipped. So you've got these sores and all this kind of stuff, and you're just dealing with it. Well, skip down, if you would, with me to verse 25. After they were put in there, this is what Paul and Silas did. Verse 25. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. I wonder if they'd ever heard that in there before. They were singing prayers and praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. Why would they be listening? Do you think that was a familiar sound in there? No, probably pain, probably complaining, probably how unfair this is. And some of those things may have been true. But while they were in there, their circumstances may have been different, but it didn't change who God is. So they're praying, singing praises, and it goes like this. It says, suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted to him, stop, don't kill yourself, we are all here. The jailer called for lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, sirs, what must I do to be saved? They replied, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved along with everyone in your household. And they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household. Even at that hour on the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them into his house and set a meal before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. So these guys get a vision from God, and it takes them to another place. It moves them from their normal to what's not normal, from their common to the uncommon. And while they're there, God uses them. And as a result of them being used, they go through some incredible pain. Vision is so powerful, but it makes our pain make sense when our pain is connected to the vision that God has given us. You're like, this is happening because of this. I get this. I understand why this is taking place now. That's how powerful vision is. It's just like that. And so these guys are there, and then the prison door opens up, and back then if a prisoner escaped, the jailer would take his own life. And that's why Paul said, hey man, we're still here, don't kill yourself. Well, the jailer walks in, he falls out of the feet, he goes, tell me what I need to do to get saved. So he took him home, cleaned him up, brought all of his household in there, all the people that worked for him, and they sit down, and Paul began to tell them about Jesus. And they were so convicted and so connected that they got saved, and then they went out and they were baptized, and then they went back to the jail that day and had their day in court. But I mean, it was just so powerful that this vision, the thing that happened in number 3 is this, is that vision draws attention to God's greatness. That if it's really God's vision, and we're doing it like we're supposed to, that at some point it takes the focus off of who we are, what we've done, and it's all connected to who God is and who He is and what He's done. I love, Joe Sumter's the guy that goes here, and I love Joe, man. His story is so incredible, and he's one whose story's been changed by Jesus. And so I said, man, how did you hear about us? Because I always like hearing people's stories. I think about this place, this facility, and where we started at. We started at that little room over there. And when it first began, we did services in there. And then at one point we did children. And now we have donuts in there. That place has always served a godly purpose. All right? So some of you obviously don't have an appreciation for God's gift of donuts to us like I do. But But I'm just telling you, it's always served a great purpose over there. And where we started, and then as time has gone on, we own this place now. But I remember I asked these one people, I'm like, we were doing a partnership class. I said, how'd you end up here? And the couple goes, the guy goes, well, she was looking online and we just moved here. And so we saw the church's name and kind of read some things about it. I said, well, that's kind of what we're looking for. And he said, we pulled into the parking lot and I looked at her and go, you got the wrong address. And so I'm like, does it look that bad? He's like, dude, it looks pretty sketchy from the parking lot. So he said, it was like the longest walk from my car into the door. And now, we see what God's doing because of vision, man. We own this place. We own all of it. We're talking about what the future's going to look like with it. Not because we want to have the nicest this or the nicest that in town. We just want to reach people. That's what we want to do, man. We want to see people give their lives to Jesus, for this to continue to be a story-changing place. That means we love whoever's in front of us. And so Joey, I see Joey, I start seeing him sitting in the back, and I'd walk by him and just something I just felt kind of drawn to him. And he showed up every Sunday. He was always by himself. And then one day we're doing baptism and we've got different people. And for whatever reason that day, to me it felt like that there were a lot of kids there. We had a few adults and a lot of kids. And so you got these kids and this grown man kind of standing there by himself. And so finally he comes up and I asked this question, hey, when did you give your life to Jesus? And he gave his answer. And I said, who's here with you? Do you have any family with you? And he said, no, it's just me by myself. I said, buddy, you got family now. And so we baptized him and pulled him up out of the water. I said, man, tell me your story. And he said, I haven't been in church in decades. I've experienced a lot of pain in my life. I haven't been in church in decades. And one time, I think he'd been fishing and he was across the street. I like him already. He's fishing. He was across the street and he saw some stuff going on over here with cars and that type of thing. And I think he said he saw a lady that had a dress on that kind of reminded him of a dress that his mom had or whatever. And there's just something in him said, man, for that many people to be there must be something good going over there. So I want to go over and check it out. So he came over for months, sat by himself. And I know what it's like. We men know what it's like, man, to be in a line and just to feel awkward and uncomfortable. We typically don't put ourselves in situations like that, do we, man? And so he stood there and he's like, man, my mind kept saying, just leave, just leave, just leave. And I get it. I would have been dealing with the same thing. But he got baptized. Joe continued to come. One day a situation happened where we were through just these weird circumstances. We reached out to this guy we were going to help because we gave this huge offering. You guys gave a huge offering and part of it went to Hydrants of Hope. And we wanted to help. We wanted it to be used on families in this area. And so they made us aware of this man him and his wife, their little boy had cancer issues. So we were going to help that family and come to find out it was Joe's son. So he starts coming to church and he's at church. He gives his life to Jesus. And all of these things take place as we're doing these things and they look like good things that are being good to our community. But over time, it turns it away from the activities that we're doing. And the vision, as God gets involved, it begins to focus on Him. And their stories are changed. Not because of any organization, their stories are changed because of what was taking place or the vision that it was connected to. At some point, turned their heart away from what was going on towards Him. Because it's His. It's His, it's not mine. It's not yours, it's not ours, it's His. And we get to be a part of it. We get to be a part of it. God doesn't use people to build His work. He uses His work to build people. And so it's what we're called to do, man. I mean, we're engaged in a great work. Vision keeps us from getting distracted from all these other ideas, from all these other things, from all these other wounds, from all these other pains, and keeps us focused on why we're here. It was the thing that caused Tina and I when we were in our 40s, and we paid huge prices, made huge sacrifices to leave everything that was comfortable. Because I began to pray and began to say, Lord, let me go back to where I grew up at. Lord, let me go back there. I'm glad you feel that way. Not everybody does. But anyway, but man, it was just one of those things. I remember, she asked me that really ridiculous question. Like she said, man, I'll go with you. But that ridiculous question of, how are we going to pay our bills? And I'm like, we don't need no stinking bills. And so, but it was just one of those things, you just kind of feel drawn to it. It's the thing when our kids were, in junior high and high school, and they're in that part of their life where they're getting attached to friendships and relationships, to have to sit down with them and say, I think God's directing us. My heart is just like Nehemiah's. My heart was dislocated. My body was in Clovis and my heart was in northeastern Oklahoma. But that begins to burn so big in you that all those other things, you're like, I don't know how that's going to happen. But I believe it's something that God's breathed in my heart. And I believe if we'll just follow Him, it doesn't mean that we won't have challenges. I'm excited about 2019, but I don't kid myself. 2019 has challenges. I love what somebody said this yesterday. I think it was a men's breakfast or something. I can't remember where I heard it, but 2018, somebody put up like, 2018, you bring it on. And then 2019, they were like, 2019, go a little easier on me than 2018 did. I'm not going to challenge you like I did 2000. But I know 2019 will have that. Well, how do we get through? We have to know why we're here. How do we keep going? How does Cedar Point, how does it continue? How does it grow? It can never be about an individual. It can never be about me. It can never be about you. It has to be about God's plan and His purpose and how He so graciously and willingly uses flawed, imperfect me. In the natural, it makes no sense to me. I would have discarded me a long time ago. But the grace of God, as we turn our hearts towards Him and as we ask Him to breathe in our heart, whatever it is that He's called us to do, and we begin to do it and it keeps us focused, and these distractions come along and try to steal our focus, and we're like, no, I'm engaged in a great work. And then the things that I put up with for so long, I begin to not put up with them any longer because I'm like, I have a vision about that. God can do something. That's went on way too long. And so I become committed. I have a reason to commit and lay my life down now because it's connected to God's purpose. Then as I begin to do it, then things happen that were even greater than I ever thought could happen. And all of a sudden, as I begin to see that, I'm no longer looking at the greatness of the vision. I'm looking at how great the vision giver is. We started in that room over there. It seems so far away from owning this whole center. We own this little piece of it. We didn't even own it. We rented it. We met in there weekly, but we knew what God had called us to do. And I remember there's this group of people that were praying, God, help us to reach people. Vision is so powerful. It's so powerful that the devil will try to minimize it in your life. It'll change your normal. I want us to do this. I want us to pray. I want us to take a moment and pray. You pray for 2019. You ask God to deal with you about things that have been in your life that are normal for way too long. Have Him give you vision and purpose about that. And then let's pray for the church, man. Pray that God will continue to breathe on us, that we'll not get distracted, that we'll keep focused on what He has for us and what His plan for our life is. But man, let's connect with the vision giver. Let Him breathe life into that. Jesus just wants to do great things for us and through us and in us. And so let's just spend a moment with God right now.